Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to our talk. Today, we will be exploring 3 artists exhibiting at the virtual edition of the Other Art Fair Los Angeles, and we will be discussing their work through the lens of materials. So why materials? As we'll find out on our tour, the materials and physical properties that compose a work can be integral to the work's meaning and a foundational component of an artist's process. These 3 artists that we're featuring today work in a variety of materials, from collage and clay to silk to even organic matter and concrete. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm here at Kenny Nguyen's booth. We'll start with him. All right, and Kenny, if you want to go ahead and come on.
Yes.
Hi, Kenny. Hi. It's great to see you, and it's so great to see you in your studio. So we're seeing some of these works live. It's exciting. I see we have right behind you over your lamp, we have the work that's hanging right here in your virtual exhibition too.
Yes, exactly. That's actually my recent work. And, I still have that in my studio, just so I feel like a sense of, the materials and, kind of sculpture work in a way.
Yeah, in scale too. So to get us started, Kenny, could you just tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to where you are today as an artist?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually was born and raised in Vietnam. A part of my family moved to the US probably about 20 years ago or so. And so our family, the last family, moved to the state to reunite with the whole big family. So that's really a big change for me. And at the time, I was starting doing like fashion design, go to this college there in Vietnam. And so after that, move here, I don't know what to do. So, art kind of like become a therapy for me. And then right after that, I went back to school and have my fine art degree. But to me, it's a lot of deep piece. It's kind of like helped me to kind of like telling the story, how I become myself as an artist today. So there's a lot to say about the identities and also the material that I adopted from my country.
Yeah, and that's a very central element of your work is the material this is made out of. I understand that these are all made out of strips of painted silk. So can you tell us a little bit about that material?
Exactly. So, what you see here is constructed with silk. So it's actually, you see the fabric first. As a lot of people, thinking you seeing the painted here, but actually the paint being trapped in the middle of the silk and the canvas. So the reason that I chose silk because the influence from the fashion design, of course, and also, I think this material that have a very rich cultural history. It's been for thousands of years, and it's a very strong but yet delicate materials. And so that's kind of like a challenge for me too to go to, back to fine art school. I got the challenge. Okay, how do you use a material that you so used to it and construct it into something else? And I found it very beautiful because it's kind of like mimicking, how our identity is changing all the time. Taking the material from a very like from a cultural root and redone it, doing something new with it. And that's the whole idea behind it.
Right. So yeah, to reiterate, so you trained as a fashion designer in
Yes.
Vietnam, and then when you moved here, you adopted a fine art practice, studied fine art, and sort of took the silk material that you were working with in fashion and brought it to the canvas. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe how these pieces are constructed from start to finish?
Yes. So, it's all constructed with a very thin single strap of silk. So it's almost become a ritual for me to just come to the studio and I would start cutting the fabric into a single strap of silk. So, the cutting, the tearing apart, and then I would soak it into acrylic paint. I will mix them on the floors. I work mainly on the floor anyway. It's just like you're weaving through the whole canvas. So individual strip of silk, soak in paint, and then put them back on the canvas. So they actually on unstretched canvas, and it's kind of heavy weight. So it's kind of have that thickness, and when it dry, it gonna leave the textures, and I'll be able to do that sculpting it because it's a thicker layers of paint in the middle. Um, it's a long and very time consuming process. But during that time, I feel like it's just my time to meditate and get bonding with the materials.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I was going to say it sounds like a very repetitive and meditative process. I do want to note, so you stylistically, you vary a lot in the color schemes that you use. So I'm kind of wondering, how much pre-planning goes into a piece? Do you decide like the color schemes from the outset, or what sort of mood you want to convey, or does it emerge kind of intuitively?
right, because this sort of like indirect painting, so I can't use a brush to mix in the paint actually. So it's a lot of time it's gonna happen when I soak in the fabric, and the paint is start to kind of floating together. So I'm mixing, ton of like hundreds of paint colors in the cups, and I just start to kind of pour them together. And so it's a lot of like replanning to, what certain color to use, and then I gotta mix them. I gotta cut the fabric, and so it's sort of like I don't have the control to see what color gonna be, mixing together. But yet I can, just repair what certain color that I want. And so a lot of these colors in here also inspired from most of the time from, just my memory of what I seen back in the country. So a lot of them from the landscape or just the environment that I'm in at certain time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, on the face of it, these are all abstract compositions, but some of your titles just they indicate summer, winter, so time of year and places. So it's interesting to hear that it is influenced by where you are in the present moment. So I'm wondering, can you tell me, let's sort of zoom out here. I'm wondering, can you tell me about any work on display here that's maybe particularly meaningful to you, or that was maybe a challenge to create?
Yes. So it's actually the piece that I think it titled Piece, and actually right behind me is right here. And that's the first piece that you walk into the booth. Um, to me, I created piece after I kind of like settled back in my studio at home because normally I do a lot of travel residency. So I would, stay in one place and making work and then, pack it home. And so actually the piece kind of like my feeling, after return home, after what going on crazy with the work out there after the pandemic, and I just want to play to kind of, just stand there and just feel very peaceful moment to see, what happened next. And to me, blue is a color of very calming, very relaxing, and I really have a strong feeling for this piece at the moment. And also the seal is constructed a little bit thicker, so I'll be able to sculpt it on and it directing mount on the canvas.
This is mounted on a canvas.
Yeah. So the back of it, it's just a wood frame canvas,
Mhm.
and it was actually sewed amount. So basically it's a fabric. So it's a lot of technique that influence from my fashion work. I do cut them after I make the paintings. And sometimes I just, stitch them together on the canvas.
So yeah, so again, I would say Kenny's process, it's very repetitive and very meditative. You clearly draw on a lot of autobiographical components. So I wonder though, and your work does, by virtue of using silk, which is this tradition rich material, it sort of meditates on kind of a cross-cultural existence. But I wonder, so when you put these works out there, to the world, what do you hope that viewers take away from them?
So I think for most, I think it's just the beauty of the materials. And when people discover this are constructed from fabric, it's almost to me is when I went to art school, it's impossible to make sculptures out of silk because it's so thin and so delicate. But then it's just a long periods of time that I've been experimenting with the materials and finally come up with more color sculptural paintings. And so for us, it's just the beauty of the material itself. And second, when people discover this, I hope they're gonna get it's a message of a metaphor for identities. And so a lot of people enjoy to sculpt the piece by themselves. So it's actually all the piece. It's on unstraight canvas. It's so I easy for the shipping and transportation from me travel different places and making the piece. And also the idea is when the collector collect the piece, they're gonna have kind of like a hand to it, a little more voice adding to the piece. Because I think our identity like changing all the time. So all the piece after it being sculpted in a different way or being sculpted by different persons or in a different space, it's gonna turn out a little bit somewhat different.
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting component too. A lot of times when you buy an artwork, you don't get to participate in it in that way. So the collector actually has the agency to sort of fold it and sculpt it the way that they would like to in their space. So that's a really interesting component as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Kenny. It's really exciting to present your work here. I do want to note that Kenny, just last year, he was named one of Saatchi Art's 35 under 35 Rising Stars. It's a very prestigious recognition that Saatchi Art gives artists. And he's exhibited his work widely in the US and has completed residencies in France and Iceland recently. So it's definitely exciting to keep an eye on Kenny's career. So next.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Kenny. We'll chat again at the end of it.
Hopefully.
Okay, so next we are going to head to Saatchi Clodpatch. Saatchi is a mixed media artist born and raised in Bangkok. She's now based in San Francisco, where she earned her master's from the San Francisco Art Institute. She's exhibited her work frequently in San Francisco and LA, and in 2019, she won first in sculpture at the Art Association of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania's juried show. So Saatchi, it's great to have you joining us today too.
Hi, thank you. My
Hi.
honor to be here too.
Okay, I'm going to enter your exhibition. Oh, I love this pink wall.
Yeah.
It's exciting to see how, I don't know if viewers realize this, but artists actually get to decide how to arrange their booths. So it's very cool to see how you all went about it. So Saatchi, to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to where you are today as an artist?
Yes, so my name is Saatchi. So I am originally from Thailand. I was born and raised in Bangkok, Thailand, and I came to the US in 2013 to study my master's degree at San Francisco Art Institute. Mm-hmm. And after graduated, I had the chance to work with a gallery. So I just continue working with my sculptures since then.
Nice. And so can you tell us a little bit about the works that are on display here today and kind of what inspired them?
Yeah, so most of my work are inspired by architecture and nature. So I like to see, how plants are growing. So I grew up with my dad who has passion with garden and orchard. So I kind of a little bit him in that sense. And being born and raised in Bangkok, you don't see a lot of plants in the city. So I am very attached to nature, from what my dad has been taught me what to do with plants. And yeah, that's kind of inspired me. And then when I grew up, I think everyone's dream is having a beautiful house, all the architecture like that. So it's kind of become my inspiration. Also, I had the bird pet since I grew up, and if you follow my Instagram, you will see a lot of her. in there. So, however, birds are very fascinated that by, you know, like what they do in the environment. So somehow that's kind of also like inspired me for the whole process to make like sculpture too.
That's very cool. That's a component of your work that I didn't know about, and I definitely think that that comes through. For anyone who can't tell, these are all sculptures that are made of, we have moss and concrete, resin, which, and I can definitely see a connection with Bird's Nest in terms of combining just found materials to create something new. So could you tell us a little bit about how you source your materials?
Yeah, so most of the material that I just basically like, it's kind of like a found object, but the object that I found is happened to be like natural material. So for example, like most of the moss, I will be traveling to like, I live in California, like San Francisco. So I go to the wine country, Napa Valley a lot. And sometimes like on the site, people just throw like logs that had some moss in there. So I usually just pull over and then scrap all the moss and like the twigs from them. And the dirt, the brown thing on that is dirt from the ground. So I've been collecting them from, you know, like the, like wherever I go to. So yeah, I've been working with one of the private winery in Napa, and then they allowed me to go to their vineyard to, you know, like gather material like moss and twigs and yeah, some branches from there. So it has been mostly like natural material that I sourced from like around me.
That's very cool. And then can you tell us from there, can you walk us through the creation of one of these sculptures and how you end up combining it into a cast concrete form?
Yeah, so this particular work is a wall installation. So I like when I was, you know, like locked out with the pandemic, I had no access to my studio, and then I was thinking about like, okay, what can I do at home? Like casting like small piece. I basically like was working in my kitchen, so I had to minimalize everything. So I cast small piece and then kind of lay them out, and I think it's kind of looks very nice. And then in the past, I have done some commission work with like some housing in San Francisco when they have just a blank wall and they want me to like fill their wall space. So I like the variety of the material and the shape. Some of them are very like architectural, like structure in like square or geometric shape, but some of them are very organic. So I like the combination. So that is kind of what I'm like heading toward to with like specifically that piece.
With this piece, yeah. So you do have some works that are clearly working their series versus standalone pieces. So can you tell me a bit about how you decide whether to create something in a series versus a standalone piece? Is it usually just based on commissions, or do you have a conceptual reasoning there?
Yeah, so to me, like with the great collection over there, I want people to be able to, you know, like be creative with their own space. So for example, like the one that I talked about before, it's need basically like it needs a specific installation, so each piece has their own, you know, like way to install it. But if people wanted to create their own sculpture, or like I mean like the wall installation, they can go ahead and then just, you know, like collect some piece, for example like the spear on the right hand side. Yeah, so I had one client that she bought like two pieces at the beginning, and then like a few couple months later, she come back to buy two more, and then she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna lay it as a grid." And then once she moved, she just laid it as a line. So it kind of create like flexibility for the client to, you know, like install the work themselves, and then they can kind of like change it when they get to, you know, like comfortable with this one, they want to lay it as a grid. Yeah, so that's kind of what I want people to aim for.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection. You and Kenny sort of both give your collectors the opportunity to sort of meld the works and display them however they want. Yeah, that's
more fun that way.
Yeah, it's a cool participatory element. So I guess another question on behalf of collectors might be, many people don't collect sculptures that have organic materials. So I'm wondering, Do you have care instructions for these, or do you sort of intend for the moss to decay? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so the moss actually all dry already, and yeah, basically like you don't have to water them; they will stay like what they are right now. And the only thing that I would be concerned about is basically you're not going to put your artwork, like no matter if it's painting or anything, like directly under the UV light or the sunlight, right? So as long as the piece is not like under the sunlight all day, it will remain the green. It might fade off a little bit, but like, yeah, as far as I have my piece, it's still like stay green.
Okay, well, that's definitely good to know. And I am curious, so could you, just to go back a little bit, and your background as an artist, can you tell us about how you first started creating works like this that combine organic matter with concrete and resin? How did that practice?
Yes. So my background from Thailand was ceramic, so I kind of learned how to make a mold or casting, like plaster for the mold making for ceramics. So when I get to school in San Francisco Art Institute, I want to experiment like other material because working with ceramics take so much longer because you have to wait until the clay dry, and then each firing takes a couple days to cool down and get to see your final piece. So I experiment like, okay, what kind of material that I want to work with. And yeah, like that is the beginning of like what I capable for. So I try with concrete and then with other material, and that is how I end up with these sculpture. Yeah, and then like my previous material would be resin because it's very hard to work with, and then there's so many type of them, but it is fun and challenging because I don't get to see what I cast until the next day when I, like take the mold out and then I see what the result, what it's come out. So it's been pretty surprised sometimes.
It's very interesting to hear when chance is such a huge part of the finished product also. So that's a really interesting process. And I'm wondering, so when you put these out to the world, what do you hope for viewers to take away from your works?
I want them to, when they walk on the sidewalk and then they see some plant or some, like some moss that growing like in between the crack of the sidewalk, I want them to think about my work and then the other way around too, because like even like they are very tiny little plants or like weeds on the ground, but they also like affect like the ecosystem, and just like think of like how beautiful they are. That is what I wanted them to see.
Yeah, that's a really lovely takeaway, and I think these definitely they're so calming in form that I think they definitely encourage viewers to sort of slow down and meditate and consider the interaction of the materials, since you are juxtaposing quite different materials here. So that's a really interesting practice. Thank you very much for sharing, Saatchi. And
thank you.
and we'll reconnect at the end of our tour. I think next we are going to move on. Yeah, thank you very much. Next, we are going to move on to Heidi Lamino. Heidi is an artist working across mediums, including drawing, painting, clay, sculpture, often portraying a human figure, female form, and movement in expressive and dynamic ways. She earned her BFA from Pratt, and she's joining us today from New York. Is that right, Heidi? You're in New York?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's get started. All right, so here we are at Heidi's booth. And so Heidi, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your background as an artist?
Sure, yeah, I'm a figurative abstract artist, and I'm definitely drawn to drawing, mark making, and a rhythm and gestural language in my pieces. I work in a couple of different materials. I work on paper, canvas, clay, and metal. And I really approach all the materials I say I'm really a drawer. I'm drawing either on paper or canvas or clay or in metal and paper. I always approach my pieces through drawing and a use of kind of like erasing, like creating a line and erasing it. It's almost like a memory and a metaphor of trying to create a feeling of a moment or a lived experience, and allowing like the marks and the ghost of the line to leave a memory behind.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I think it's interesting that you describe your process as drawing across mediums. We don't have any on display here today, but Heidi also works in clay and ceramics, like I mentioned. She also has these really interesting metal sculptures that actually echo many of the forms you see here today, like this folded female form. And so I do want to mention, so across these works, you do really meditate on the form, and you have a habit of repeating the female form. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that choice of subject matter.
Yeah, I'm always drawn to figurative abstraction. I go through, I tend to work in series and seasonally, if that makes sense. I live in New York, and in the winter, I tend to revert back to my work that is inspired by the masters, like the large format paintings. They're actually called the Horse Fair. They're inspired by Rosa Bonheur's Horse Fair from the Met. And they're works that I'm always like works of Rosa Bonheur, the Romantic Expressionists. So I refer back to these master paintings and reflect on the movement and the rhythm in the work. So this is a black and white version of the drawing of Rosa Bonheur, and then it's a colored full oil version of the Rosa Bonheur.
Right, side by side here. Yeah,
and with the work, I'm trying to really connect to rhythm and movement. And it's always a form of a portrait, or the way that I actually move through the world. So the horse is almost one of the symbols that I use as a self-portrait. And it's the beauty and the rhythm and the strength that I try to incorporate in the pieces.
Yeah, and definitely, I mentioned that repetition seems to be part of your practice as well. And that's an interesting component, because then you get to see sort of the viewer sees in the finished product sort of insights into your process, the layers of work, and you can definitely tell that draftsmanship really underlies Heidi's process. And so it's interesting how we can see sort of insights into how
the intuitive process is so important for me. Like the 3 charcoal drawings of the female figures, I'm really drawn to process, and I'm really drawn to the intuitiveness of the work and allowing it to go where it wants to go. You might have an intention when you start drawing on paper or canvas, but I allow the piece to go where it wants to go and not control it. And these 3 pieces were created luckily I had access to my studio during the pandemic. I tended at first to work really small. I have a whole series of really small paper work that I did more intimately. I had a hard time finding the emotional space to work really large in painting and drawing. So it took me a while to go back into that and find that space, just with everything that was going on in the US and everything that was going on in the world with the pandemic. So these 3 pieces, I call them drawing from the inside out. And they're my physical and emotional way of expressing the female in a figurative form through language and mark making. And the 3 I start them with my eyes closed, using both my right and left hand. And I find the figure. And then once I find that rhythm and that figure, I allow and create the piece to become what it wants. Especially with the 3rd one, I tend to go back and erase and redraw and erase and then a redraw. And it's finding your way through something. It's like the layers of life or the layers of a piece. I'm always trying to allow that, like almost like a kind of poetry or a metaphor that I hope that the viewer can step into that space that I'm trying to create. So that there's a feeling of a memory or a connect to a certain emotion. So that's what these three pieces were about. The acrylics, they were actually done earlier, and they're part of my folded female series on canvas, paper, metal, and clay.
Mhm.
And they're just taking the female form and allowing the abstraction of finding the physicality and the emotional space that she's in. The ones above, these are all on paper. The two above and the one to the right, they're actually three-dimensional. I added videos, but I'm not sure if it works, so I'll have to update that. But these are folded female forms on paper with acrylic and charcoal.
Mhm.
And what I do is I draw and paint the figure, and through a feeling of like it's intuitive, I cut it out and then I fold it and I restructure it to find a new form. And it's kind of the way I'm trying to reflect upon the way that we all fold in and reinvent ourselves and allow life to have its impact, and then fold in, and then you fold out again a bit stronger. So that's really the inspiration that I'm coming to in these pieces, is just allowing life to affect through marks and erasing and the lines to be left behind, and then the folding and unfolding of yourself and how you find a new form. The large piece is actually for women. It's called right there. It's also a folded piece. It's about 2.5 inches high in a shadow box. So you can't see it that well, but it is a three-dimensional piece. I do this with paper and canvas also, creating a three-dimensionality to my pieces. I'm very drawn to the Greek and Roman art. I definitely go back to that a lot and draw upon it. And these are for women, and they are a relief of inspired by Greek goddesses, and trying to invoke a feeling just of change and movement and beauty and malleability, and being able to reconstruct yourself during life and situations that occur.
Yeah, I think that's, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. I'm just moving through.
Well, I think that it's really interesting to hear, firstly, about how COVID impacted your practice. I think it's interesting you mentioned that you didn't have that emotional energy and perhaps also the physical space to go large. But it's interesting to hear too that so much of these figures, not only are you exploring the physical space, but also the psychological space, and what psychologically might be represented by folding, or by these active lines, or by these sort of enclosed spaces that this figure finds themselves in. So thank you very much for sharing those insights into your process. I had no idea that you started these with your eyes closed. That definitely that lends an interesting element to the work too. So I wonder, in general too, like I've asked everyone else, what do you hope that viewers take away from your works when you put them out there?
I always hope that my work invokes an emotion, a thought, or a memory in the viewer, and I hope that it allows them to step into that space that I'm actually creating it in. A lot of times when I start a drawing, I'll use a long reed. So I'm actually a good 3 to 4 feet back. So I have space between myself and the work. So there's an emotional space. So I always hope that the viewer can step into that space.
That's a very interesting process as well. It's so reminiscent of action painting too, the way that you go about these. So yeah, and so thank you very much for sharing. It's interesting to hear how grounded your practice is in art history too, and these techniques and subjects from art history. So thank you very much. And I do want to mention again that Heidi does work across 3D materials as well. In addition to these folded forms you see here, you can find her sculptures and ceramic pieces on her profile on Saatchi Art. So definitely check that out as well. So I think I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all come back on. and close out our talk. If everyone else wants to join, turn on their mics and videos. All right, well, thank you all again for joining today. And I know that we don't have audience questions right now, but I thought a good way to close out, and this is something that some of you have already touched on, but I'm wondering, to close out, if you could all share a little bit maybe about how COVID and the events of the past year have affected your process and your practice, for better or worse, and where you see your practice going from here. Saatchi, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, so I think the COVID at the beginning of the lockdown, like as I mentioned before, that I start like working with a smaller scale and then do like a installation into like a larger piece. So I think that is what gave me an opportunity to trying to find something else and work on something else. It doesn't have to be like one big solid piece. So I think I can continue working on that, just kind of like get away from the big sculpture a little bit, have like more variety of work. Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Oh, that's great. And Kenny too, can you tell us a little bit?
Yes, well, I'm totally agree with that. And also, I think art become a shelter for me too when I'm staying home, and it's become something very essential for me. It's also as an artist, to keep practicing even though, what's crazy going on with the work out there. So it's also a place for me to just meditate and just feel fully, have freedom for myself. And as a way, art become a rescue to me too. And I'm really thankful for, all about to have this talk, and I totally feel connected with Saatchi, as also Heidi. Um, I think it's just a beautiful way how we stay true with the material, but then we create something totally new. Um, yeah, I'm really appreciate this.
That's great. Yeah, I'm appreciative of you all being here too today, despite all the technological hiccups that we might experience. And of course, it's a bit surreal to be reduced to a square on Zoom. But it's great that we can all join remotely and have collectors tune in from all over the world and be able to purchase your works from all over the world. And Heidi, I know you already mentioned, it seems like COVID really had a strong impact on the works that you've created recently. But if you have anything else to share on that or where your process is headed, definitely feel free.
I'm definitely so inspired, and I felt really appreciative and almost a little guilty to have a safe studio to go to. So that's why it was hard for me to step back into my large work. So for me, the paper, it was there's something about the texture of paper and charcoal that it's a tactile experience. So for me, it was my way back into creating my work. So it was my own personal therapy, but then I found myself cutting it, folding it, reconstructing it, mending it, putting it back together in a different way, because I knew that I had to and the world had to. So it was my way of being able to process and just reveal both literally and figuratively through my work. And I was really grateful that I had this Folded Female series that I could go to, because it allowed me to express my own process and be able to process. So I was really grateful to that. And I love the group that you selected. Our work there's such a similarity to it. There's something that I just love, and I'm so happy to meet both of them today. Yeah,
I was so excited to be able to pull this group together too. I mean, you all have such strong and distinct practices, and it's so fascinating to hear about how you've all adapted to the constraints and the limitations, and of course the psychological stresses of the pandemic. And it's always so reaffirming to hear when an artist is able to sort of push through constraints and let their practice evolve into something new. So we're definitely excited to see where you are all headed. And thank you so much again for joining us for this talk and revealing a bit more about your work. I know I learned new things about each of your practices today, so I hope that our viewers do as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
great.
Thank
really
you.
nice.